It's have been nearly 2 months since the newest hit game from Software's Elden Ring have brought death and despair to homes across the world. Despite the difficulty associated with previous games from Software's, Elden Ring sets a new example of having the hardest enemies in any game ever made. Some players even dropping the game only after 5 minutes because of being unable to make it past the initial character maker. If players are able to progress past this initial round line of learning, they can then see grotesque enemies that are seemingly impossible to defeat and can potentially end the lives of the player's characters like an expiration date on a jug of milk. The new enemies' combat powers can be described as a culmination of their impossibly disgusting designs that leave the player in a state of fear and being very scared, their utterly unprecedented aggressive abilities, and their bone-shattering damage. Tarnish, be aware! The following top 10 list of the hardest enemies in Elden Ring may leave you frozen in fear and question the safety of everyone you've ever known or seen before in your entire life. During the initial character creation, players are able to choose a keepsake, which is a unique item that players will begin the game with. If the stone sword key is chosen, players able to access an area that's normally blocked off by a cloud at the beginning of the game. Despite maybe being one of the first enemies a player might see in the entire Elden Ring's game, it can be very easily for him to take players by surprise with its fast speeds, wheels with spikes, and unreal damage. He is the Wheel Horse. After challenging this opponent multiple times, I found that the enemy seems completely immune to any type of damage, so right away I decided that this must be one of the most difficult enemies in the Elden Rings. Immediately after being introduced to the open world, players are presented with their first challenging enemy, the Whiteface Man. The Whiteface Man stands stoically, patiently awaiting players to land their first blow. After allowing player a few hits as a prank, the Whiteface Man unveils his secret weapon, a big hammer that makes player give blood. Apart from his unrivaled speed, the biggest challenge is that he comes after you immediately after every time you respawn. If the player tries to escape the Whiteface Man's madness, they will be herded towards his friend that looks like a golden man on a horse, and will be immediately punished shortly thereafter. This makes this enemy unlike any other foe encountered in all of Dark Souls history. If the player gets curious and decides to head westward from the starting area, they will encounter the next enemy on this list, the Big Bats. Although the Big Bats don't have very much HP, they're able to easily evade any melee attack thrown at them due to how short the player character is. Despite their constant movement, it can be very confusing for the player to know whether they are getting ready to strike or simply watching the player in anticipation. What's even worse is that where there's one big bat, there's typically more big bats to back up the first one, so players must withstand the onslaught of upwards 6 big bats. With their relentless speed and number, this makes big bats the 8th hardest enemy in all of the Elden Rings. North from the starting area lies the Church of Ela, and inside there lies one of Elden Ring's most indomitable enemies, Santa's Little Helper. Dressed in the garb of Santa, and menacingly sitting at a campfire awaiting your first strike, Santa's Little Helper makes a mockery of the player combat prowess. With his noble steed by his side, Santa's Little Helper will take up mounted combat once the player decides to engage him in combat. Like the Big Bats, Santa's Little Helper trumps the player in speed and agility, making it very difficult to even get close enough to land a single attack on him. A single strike from Santa's Little Helper will leave the player with around 25% less health when starting out. The Little Helper's game is the long game. While not being overtly aggressive, the player will often run out of stamina just to keep up with Santa's Little Helper, leading Santa's Little Helper striking while the player is most vulnerable. This all adds up to Santa's Little Helper claiming his rightful place as the 7th hardest enemy in all of the Elden Rings. Although these enemies appear relatively harmless, they harness a terrible secret. The secret is poison. Players shouldn't encounter much in the way of physical counterattacks after engaging with these snails, but they will often unleash a green cloud of poison that will whittle away at the player's HP once inflicted. Even when the player can get a successful jump on the poison snails, they will need to contend with the other enemies nearby, like the deadly dragonflies. It should be added that just because poison is the snail's weapon of choice, doesn't mean it doesn't have other tricks up its sleeve. The poison snail's deadly reputation precedes them as number 6 on our list. If players decide to explore past the Church of Ella, they may find themselves inside the darkness of the Groveside Cave, one of the first optional areas. Inside this cave, players are welcomed to a pack of wolves that guard their territory like the alley cats. What makes the wolves in the Elden Ring so difficult is their sheer numbers. Wolves will often surround the player, leaving them nowhere to run, as they take turns pounding the player with unrelenting speed and force. After being annihilated by these wolves countless times, I finally became aware of the heavy jump strike and found that it is extremely effective against the wolf packs, and I was able to progress to the enemy that takes the number 4 spot on our list. Once players are able to progress past the wolves inside the Groveside Cave, they will meet their next tough challenger, the Beastman from Farum Azula. What makes the Beastman such a challenging adversary is his speed mixed with his cunning and hard-hitting strikes. The Beastman is aggressive, rarely showing any opening for the player to attack. This can lead to many mistakes by the player that will end in them reuniting with their old friend, the "You Died" screen. Although the Beastman may have speed and power on his side, I was able to defeat him after discovering that he too is weak to the heavy jump strike attack, awarding me with the Flame Drake Talisman, which allows me to withstand a teeny bit of fire damage. Not bad for the 4th hardest enemy in the game. Following the main path in the game will lead players to the Gatefront Ruins, where a squad of soldiers are found resting and patrolling the ruins. Once players choose to engage in combat with the soldiers, all hell will break loose as all the soldiers will converge upon the player's position. Although the soldiers are relatively easy to dispatch on their own, they are near impossible to dispatch once they become united. What makes matters worse is that there's also a bigger soldier with big armor there that will do major damage, and he has long combos that can make the player very scared. The soldiers prove that size really does matter and earn their keep at number 3 on our list. A short ways outside of the Gatefront Ruins, players will encounter a new type of vicious enemy on horseback, the Horseback Samurai. These hulking enemies will ride around and hunt the player down until their dying breath. Their tactic of choice is confusing the players with psych outs and heavy strikes. Not even the heavy jump strike could prove effective, as the speed of the samurai's horse allow him to outmaneuver heavy strike. During one attempt, I was able to dismount the samurai and chose to hunt down the horse to ensure that he didn't mount back up again. But once the horse was neutralized, I was easily cut down by the samurai with a single powerful swipe. The bold spirit of the samurai proves timeless, as he is the 2nd hardest enemy in the Elden Rings. Making your way further south of the Gatefront Ruins will lead you to a truly monstrous trio of wandering drunk men. While feigning innocence and appearing defenseless, the true threat lies within the soul of the drunk man with the torch, as a single hit will inflict massive fire damage on the player. What makes this attack so impossible is that the player will become stun-locked by the torch, and will continue taking additional fire damage for as long as the drunk man holds out the torch. The only way to successfully tackle this trio is to ensure that you don't get hit by the fire. This makes the Drunk Men trio the most difficult enemy in all of the game from Software's Elden Ring, and they prove that fire truly is the soul of humanity. Naturally, there were countless other enemies that didn't make our small top 10 list, and we mean no disrespect to them, but these enemies are the ones we personally found most challenging. Tell us what you think of our choices, or tell us what enemies that you find to be the most challenging in the comments below. Thanks for watching. This was a Super Beet Top 10 list.
Cut.